Good evening, John Barry from Barry Law Firm at the Capital Cigar Lounge with Tony Goins,
Yes.
here in Lincoln, Nebraska. Now, Tony and I are going to talk about operations and execution today. The amazing thing about Tony is the principles that he learned as a sergeant, a buck sergeant in the Marine Corps, made him successful not only in running operations in Fortune 500 companies, but also in startups. I'm going to have Tony talk a little bit about his story and how he got from being a sergeant in the Marine Corps to where he is today. And we'll get a little bit deeper into some conversations about some of the tough questions that we as leaders have to ask ourselves when it comes to execution, operating, and trusting our team. So Tony, you were a sergeant in the Marine Corps, in the 80s, right?
Yes. I went in 1982, got out in 1986. I picked up E5 in July of 1984. So I was meritoriously promoted to corporal, which is an E4 in the Marine Corps. I went to NCO school, which is Non-Commissioned Officers Leadership Academy. I knew going in that the honor grad would automatically meritoriously be promoted to sergeant. So it was my goal, as those, John, you served also. Once you understand the mission and you understand the goal, then you just re-engineer the process in order to achieve. So what I was really clear on is that if I became the honor grad, I would pick up E5. So 3 months into being an E4, I went to NCO school, and I was the honor grad from NCO school, so I picked up E5 after only 3 months of being a corporal.
And you humped the pig. At some point, you carry the M60 machine gun.
I did. My job in the Marine Corps, my primary MOS, which is military occupational specialty, was an 0331, which is an M60 machine gunner. I was originally attached to Fox Company, but later on, I became an 0121, which is admin, but my primary job was the battalion legal clerk. Eventually, I became the battalion legal chief, so I did non-judicial punishments, court-martial, special, general, and summary court-martials. I was responsible for working with the adjutant and the legal officer, unfortunately, to process Marines that didn't behave themselves.
Sure, and we all have those issues. Now, as we sit here smoking cigars, I reminisce about my deployments in the Army, and General Order Number 1. We didn't have our families there. You couldn't have a beer at the end of the day,
right.
But you could have a cigar.
Cigar.
Yep. And
right.
the great cigar companies and some great Americans would send us cigars and say, "Hey,
right.
Enjoy." And that was one of the things we had at the end of the day was a good cigar. So it's great here to reminisce about our military careers and the cigars.
That's right. Absolutely.
Now you get back to the civilian world. You go to a bank and you talk about all this administrative experience, you have all this leadership experience,
yes.
And they say you're qualified for what?
To be a security guard.
So what do you do?
So the company was American Express. I applied for a number of administrative tasks at American Express, but they looked at my primary MOS as a machine gunner, and they basically said that I was qualified to guard the front desk.
Right.
So I became a security guard at American Express, and that was October of 1986. It was a facility that had 6,000 people, and John, those of us that serve, regardless of what your job is, it doesn't matter. You do it to the best of your abilities. So as a security guard, we were responsible for the parole and the safekeeping of over 6,000 employees at American Express. We had rotational duties, which meant that we paroled the perimeter of American Express, which I was very comfortable in doing. We managed the interior, and then we also had camera duties. So American Express had a very elaborate camera system that covered the entire facility. Again, it was a camp of 6,000 people. So for 8 hours, at some point in time, I would look at cameras to make sure that everybody was safe and there was no activity going on that would harm the employees of that company.
Now, one of the things in the Ranger Creed that we talk about is, our neatness of dress and our care of equipment, right? And that we will always, we never leave a fallen comrade.
That's right.
But one of the things we talk about is our neatness of dress and care of equipment. And this is what got you somewhere right away.
It did. There was a senior manager at American Express. His name was Malcolm Mitchell. And he noticed that every day he would come in, my uniform was pristine. My shoes were always polished. My tie was always tied correctly. Everything was pressed and had creases. And so he would always notice my personal appearance. And so one day he asked me if I could do something more than just guard the front desk. He said, "You're a sharp young man, and I think you got more in you than what you're doing right now." So he allowed me the opportunity to shadow a credit authorizer at American Express, which wasn't right at the front line. It was about one level above the front line, but the job was to evaluate credit and to do on-the-spot approvals for customers that were at the point of sale, regardless as to what merchant they were using their card. And so I went, he called me up to the floor. I shadowed a credit authorizer for about 3 hours. And after 3 hours, I said to him, I said, "Malcolm, if you give me a chance, I can do this job." He says, "Walk me through why you think you have the ability to do the job." So, John, as you know, in the military, we take very copious notes.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you know, from a procedure standpoint, there's certain things on the battlefield and whatever you're doing, you have to literally memorize. And so I was able to regurgitate to him the logic behind the job, the end game, the execution specific to what the job entailed. And he trusted me. So the next day he went down to human resources and he said, "I'm going to hire the security guard to be a credit authorizer." And human resources opposed his decision.
Sure.
He says the guy has no background. He hasn't demonstrated the ability to be able to do this job. He has no previous experience. And Malcolm said, "I got a gut feel and I trust this guy." So he gave me the opportunity. So I went to credit authorization school at American Express. I graduated in the top 2% of the class, and within 6 months on the floor, I was in the top 5% of over 500 credit authorizers at Amex.
And you did it because you wanted to do it. I mean, you're a man of no excuses.
No excuse. Well, and John, you know, in the military, we can't have excuses. Excuses don't exist.
Yeah, the drill sergeant doesn't listen to excuses.
No, they don't listen to excuses. You know, and what I will say is, one of the things that I will tell anyone is most important is teamwork. And so I had people around me that wanted to see me succeed. So at every point in time, they saw how hard I was working. They saw the fact that I was taking manuals home every night and studying those manuals and coming back the next day better every day. And so I had Margaret Arnett, Mary Ponder, Gwinnett Simons. I still remember all of these names. Neil Feldbaum, Mike Collins, Malcolm Mitchell. Just a number of people that wanted to see me successful. And they worked with me in order to help me become, deliver results and to be a good credit authorizer.
So you had leaders and mentors that were pushing you through, and they saw your drive and they helped you.
They did, absolutely. So a 9-year career at American Express, I went from being a security guard to a senior manager in what was called consolidated operations. And in Con Ops, American Express back then had 3 regional operational centers. They had one in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, one in Greensboro, North Carolina, which is where I was, and one in Phoenix, Arizona. And the call volume, as customers would call in, you would have to allocate that call volume to one of those 3 sites to make sure that those customers got taken care of in an expedient manner. And right now they have technology that automatically shifts those calls based on the volume coming in. But back then it was manual. So you were watching 10, 15 monitors. It was almost like you were an air traffic controller, and you were moving call volume to one of those 3 sites to make sure that they were taken care of. And I had a team of people that did that for me. That was my last position at American Express.
And you moved on from there, and you had several other corporate jobs. I think one of the things that really impressed me was financial crisis of 2008 hits, and you get contact. They say, "Hey, we need someone to help us. Tony, will you come to New York City?" And for a lot of people, it was, "Oh man, like I don't want to, hey, I'm comfortable where I am." But you said, "No, we train for this. Just like in the military, we train for battle. We're in a crisis. I'm in."
Absolutely. So at the time, I was at USAA, a company that I absolutely loved. I could relate to USAA simply because of my military background. And John, as you know, USAA, you take care of military members and their families. I learned a lot from General Joe Robles, who was a former 3-star general in the Army, CEO of American Express. He called all of his veterans by their rank.
Yeah.
So now I'm in my mid-40s, and all of a sudden I'm getting called Sergeant Goins again.
Right.
And we called him General Robles. But yeah, the financial crisis hit 2008, 2009, 2010. I got a call from a good friend, Ron Gartlett, who Ron and I worked together at Ford Motor Company. And Ron was at JP Morgan Chase and said there's an opening for head of operations for the automotive and student division. which was a $50 billion division at JP Morgan Chase, 270,000 employees, $2.3 trillion bank. Jamie Dimon, of course, the chairman and CEO of that firm. And I went through 33 interviews to get the job. My last interview was with Frank Bisignano. Frank is currently the chairman and CEO of First Data. And I never forget Frank asking me about decisions. Tony, how do you make decisions? And it took me back to Sergeant Major Lewis G. Lee, who told me as an E5, he said, Sergeant Goins, your decisions could cause a chaplain to go to someone's front door. And that was the response I gave Frank Bisignano. And I got the job.
And obviously you made it through and got to see people at their best and at their worst.
People at their best. And, you know, John, as you know, in the military, character is something that we hold near and dear to our hearts. And character, courage, and your value system, it's easy to be a leader when things are going well. I mean, everybody wants to be out front when things are going well. What we say in the military is you find out what you're made of when rounds start coming down range, meaning when you're getting shot at. And in the corporate world, you find out what people are made of during the most pressure-filled times. And this was during the financial crisis. So you had Elizabeth Warren, who started the CFPB. You had the OCC, which is the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. And at the time, unfortunately, the mortgage crisis had caused the entire United States economy and eventually the world economy to collapse, and banks were being held accountable. So there were numerous enforcement actions. I was deposed by the CFPB and the OCC in deposition-like conversations at the same time. So you're sitting in a chair and you have the regulators in front of you and they're firing questions at you, and you know that if you deliver the wrong answer, then that could be personally detrimental to you, but even more so detrimental to your troops and to the firm itself.
Sure. And as a trial lawyer, we prepare for days for depositions. And we know. And we're coming at you. And our job is to get the best result for our client, whomever that client may be.
Absolutely.
And you know they're coming for you. And
Yes,
you're under the pressure, and you know that you answer a question a certain way, it could affect the company. And you know that no matter what, you must tell the truth.
You must tell the truth. You must tell the truth. To that point, John, I spent numerous hours being prepped by company attorneys. I remember, of course, Jeff Levine, who was our chief legal counsel. I spent a number of hours with Jeff. And to your point, just going over and over, if you don't know, you say you don't know. But when you state a fact, you're affirmative in the way you position your statement, your voice tone matters. I mean, you have to come across as being confident in what you're saying.
Just like giving an order in the military.
Just like giving an order in the military.
You know that maybe it's all going to blow up in your face, but you make a decision, you give an order as clearly and concisely as you can.
Absolutely.
And once you give it, you stick with it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's what I went through doing those deposition-like conversations with our regulators.
And they try to ask you questions and get you to go back. But at the end of the day, they always say if your values are clear, decisions are easy. And I think also when you tell the truth, answering questions is not that difficult.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We would always say, in absence of policies and procedures, you fall back on your values. Because you can't write a policy and procedure for every situation in life. Impossible to do. But in absence of policies and procedures, you fall back on your values. And that's what we did. And you know, to JP Morgan Chase's credit, the majority of the enforcement actions were really due to acquisitions. So at the behest of the American government, we purchased two institutions that we really didn't need. Well, really one, Bear Stearns. JP Morgan Chase had no need for Bear Stearns. We already had an investment firm, but you had just had the implosion of one other major investment firm, and Bear Stearns was very close to going under. And so we had to purchase Bear Stearns to prop up the economy of the United States system. And so we purchased Bear Stearns. The due diligence was done over a weekend. We also purchased Washington Mutual, which was a large bank on the West Coast. And they had, underwritten some loans that probably shouldn't have been approved. And there was some activity involved with those loans. But at the end of the day, what we know in the military is once you own something, you're accountable for it. It doesn't matter when it happened. Once you own it, you're accountable for it. So I was accountable for those portfolios. I had to respond to questions based on things that happened even before I took over the job, but that's no excuse.